Alright, let's look at conditional statements and loops, and we are still going to use Rhinoscript with Python. So conditional loops basically will do something. If a statement evaluates true or false, loops are iterations. We'll combine the loops and conditional statements and see what we get. So these sort of forms the building blocks of most of the projects that you would want to do. So let's say if A is 25 or 35 and B is 25, then we can, if you print A greater than B, it should be true, and it is. So suppose we want to say if A, let's say if A greater than B. So Python knows that if is a keyword, and as soon as we type in if, it knows that there's a condition that Python has to evaluate after after if, and the colon says that the condition, the statement is over at that point, and when we hit return, it gives us this indent. So Python works with indents. We have to have consistent indents. So if you say print, okay, condition 1, and we don't indent it correctly, so we have 4 characters in line 5, and then we move it to 2 characters in line 6, and we print A. This will give us an error, a syntax error, unindent doesn't match. So if we just make the indentation consistent, then everything will work. So that's how Python works. So if A is greater than B, then print condition 2, and to make this condition work, you make A as 350. We don't have to. A is already greater than B, so the first statement will evaluate to be true. If you make B greater than A, then the second statement will evaluate to true, and it will print condition 2. So suppose we have a third variable which is C, and C, the value of C is 54. If A is greater than B or C is greater than A, then it prints this condition 1. So this will actually just work because it is doing either A greater than B is true or C greater than A is true. So even though the first condition is not satisfied, the second condition is satisfied, and that's why the first statement is executed. So if we do AND, then both conditions must be satisfied. So if, and, or, these are all keywords, reserved keywords in Python. Okay. So if we do A greater than B and C greater than A, then this first condition is not satisfied at all, and it prints condition 2. What else? So we can also have else if loops, else if statement, which is given by elif A is greater than C, then we print, say, condition 2, and finally if nothing works, then we print condition 3. So first it's going to check for A greater than B. That doesn't work. It checks for A greater than C, and if that doesn't work, then whatever is the result, just prints condition 3. So to test this, let's do A greater than C. Now the second condition should be satisfied, so we get condition 2. That's the condition. Let's say, suppose we want to break this up into a for loop and conditions. Okay, so loops can be of 2 types. We can do a for loop, and we can have a while loop. So there are more loops, more ways of looping in Python, but these two are we'll use more. For the most part, we'll use for and while. So let's start with for. So if you have for I in range 0 to 10 and increment by 1, print I. So what the statement means is first of all it's initializing a variable which is I. Then it says that first I will take a value of 0, it will go up to 10, and at each step it will increment by 1. So I goes to 0 and it prints this statement. Once it has completed printing this statement on line 2, it goes back to line 1, and when it goes back to line 1 the value of I becomes 1. So it does this 10 times, and the value of I goes from 0 to 0 to 9. So it's iterated 10 times starting at 0 and it ends at 9. It won't do 10 because at that point the condition has been met. Okay, so basically we can say that 10 is not included. The value, the upper limit is not included in this iteration. Okay, let's look at, at this point we can also do something like say a is 5 and we want to stop the iteration when the value of I is greater than a. So we can say that if I is greater than a, break. Now at this point it won't it will stop the iteration. Okay, so it will only print the value of I from 0 up to 5, and you can see that that's what it does, from 0 to 5. Suppose we were to say b is equal to 3, and at 3 it won't print. So suppose we want to say if I is equal to b, then continue. That means it will just go back and loop. It's not going to execute this statement which is print I. Okay, so we will get 0, 1, 2, 4 and 5. Okay, so you can see that we get 0, 1, 2, 4 and 5. So that's some of the conditional statements that we can have within loops. We can do the same thing with while loops. So let me put a multi-line comment here. Okay, this is a multi-line comment, and we will do the same thing with the while loop. So I'll just copy and paste this bit of the code and say that, let's say I is equal to 0 and while I is less than 10, start evaluating the code. So everything remains the same. So one thing we have to note is that in the while loop the value of I does not increment automatically like in the for loop. So we have to manually increment the value of I by saying I plus is equal to 1, which is actually I is equal to I plus 1. Okay, once we run this, it should be the same, where it's printing out 1, 2, 4 and 5. It skips b, the value of b which is 3, it skips that value, continues the evaluation, and it stops as soon as I is greater than a, which is 5. Finally I just want to show that both the loops are exactly the same. You can use one interchangeably. So let's remove all the intermediate steps. So we have the for loop, so we remove the quotation marks, remove the comments. So what we're doing is we are going to loop from 0 to 10 and print I using the for loop and the while loop. And in the while loop we also want to have this is equal to 1. So both of them, as you can see, are exactly the same loops. However, it must be noted that apparently looping is considered expensive in Python, in Python generally, sorry. So typically they use NumPy and a lot of matrix multiplications, but it's a more structured way of programming, just for your information. Okay, so see you next time with where we start talking about the functions and we start looking at geometry and really start using the Rhino Python API. Thank you.